And then I'll move us into the presentation mode. We're going to be joined this evening by Tom Seeley. Dr. Seeley is a professor in the Department of Neurobiology and Behavior at Cornell University, and he spent decades studying bees and ranks at the top of my list of fabulous presenters. So I'm delighted, and I know you will be too, to participate in this webinar. It's a fascinating subject with incredible detail, a richness of presentation that we don't often see. There will be 2 videos that Tom is going to show as part of the webinar. If you have a less than good high-speed connection, the video segments may not appear for you. So they're both about 25 seconds long, so as they're playing you may hear sound and not see video, and if that's the case, just hang tight and you'll reconnect. Well, we won't disconnect, but you'll be fine when we go back to the PowerPoint presentation. So with that, I am going to stop talking and turn the microphone over to Tom, and I'm going to sit and hover with my microphone off. So welcome, Tom, and welcome everyone to this presentation on how honeybees choose a forest home.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for inviting me to this, and delighted to be able to share this story with folks. It is a story that I think you'll enjoy because it deals with a problem that we've all had to face, finding a place to live, and we'll see how this is done in a very organized fashion by a swarm of bees. I'll explain momentarily what I mean by a swarm of bees. But let's start by imagining we're taking a walk in the woods, and we come across a tree like this sugar maple, and we look at it, we think, that's a nice looking tree, but maybe it's nothing very special. But then, and now I want to pull down the little pointer arrow. Here we go. If we look carefully at that tree, we would see bees flying in and out of the knothole here. And if we were able to climb up into the tree and look in that knothole, we would indeed see that there are bees living in that tree. And as we'll see in this story, it turns out this tree is a very special tree, as are all bee trees, in that they are trees that have been carefully selected over a multi-day selection process by a colony of bees. And a site that the bees are living in is not just any old site. It has to meet certain criteria of the bees in terms of roominess and size of the front entrance, and it has to be approved by hundreds of bees before it will be accepted. So it is a very special. It's a tree that is very special to the bees, and we'll see what that means and how they are chosen. This particular tree is a tree that I took apart to study the nest where the bees were living inside it, and this is that portion of the tree that was housing the colony of bees that was here. This is the knothole that we were just looking down. And looking inside this tree, you can see that there's actually quite a large cavity in there. The bees need a lot of space in which to build their combs and in which to store the honey that they use as their winter heating fuel. Bees go through the winter by keeping themselves warm. In fact, they keep the inside of their cluster at about 95 degrees Fahrenheit, nearly our body temperature. And to do that, they have to have a good store of honey. That's their winter heating fuel, and so they need enough space to store up 40 pounds of honey. All in all, this tree is a dream home for honeybees. And what made it a dream home was the fact that it fulfilled several of their real estate preferences. One of those is the height of the entrance. This tree exemplifies how bees prefer an entrance that's high off the ground. This one is 27 feet up in the air. They also like a small entrance. This one was only about 5 square inches. That's what they like. It also had a spacious cavity, 10 gallons, and I know that because when taking this nest apart, I removed all the combs and refilled the cavity with sand, so I know exactly the volume of that tree cavity, even though it's a very irregular cavity. And another thing that was special about this site is that all of these features were in a live tree with sturdy walls. And I think you can see this is a rather unusual set of traits. You've got a live tree that has a large rotted cavity in the middle of it, and that even though that cavity is large, it's accessed just through a relatively small knothole, and furthermore, that knothole is high off the ground. It's an unusual set of combination of traits, but that's what the bees want, and that's what's important to them. And in fact, that's not all that's important to them. There's a whole set of things that matter to the bees. They like of these different nest site properties. They like, with respect to the cavity, they like it to be the right size, as we've talked about already. They want it not too small. Here I've measured it in liters, not as, they like it about 40 liters. That's about 1.5 cubic feet. Not smaller than that and not a lot larger than that. Again, as I mentioned, so they have enough room to store the honey they need to get through the winter. They also like their cavity to be dry and not drafty. But on these particular traits, they actually can do something about it. They come into a cavity that's a little wet because rain has been leaking in, or is a little drafty because there's some cracks in the walls. They can go out and collect tree resins and waterproof and caulk up the cracks. And so those are things that they can fix. But they can't change the volume of a cavity much. And with respect to the entrance, they like it a small entrance. I didn't mention why they like it small. That's largely so it's easily defended against predators, and it also helps them keep the nest warm in the winter, so it's not too drafty in there. They like the entrance high off the ground. Probably that's most important in terms of defense. It means that predators like bears are much less likely to notice their nest if it's high off the ground. They like the entrance at the bottom of the cavity. That helps keep the heat in the cavity. And they like it to face south, so they get a nice sun exposure summer and winter. So they're quite picky about where they nest. And that's probably why they're so careful, why they go to so much trouble, so much effort to choosing a good home. And that's what we'll look at now. Now, where does this house hunting or home site choice process, where does it fit into the biology of honeybees? Well, it fits in right at this time of year. This is the late spring, early summer is the time when honeybee colonies get very large. They've come out of the winter, they're growing inside their hives, and they actually outgrow their hive. They get to the point where the colony can afford to divide itself, to fission. And it creates this thing called a swarm. This is a reproductive propagule, and it consists of a queen bee. The mother queen has left with about 10,000 of the worker bees from the parental nest, and they fly out in a mad swirl, and then but they don't go straight to their new home. In fact, they haven't yet chosen their new home, so they stop maybe 100 feet or so from the parental nest and form a bivouac cluster. What we see here, this is a swarm cluster. There's one queen bee in the middle of this thing, and lots and lots of worker bees, as you can see. One thing I want to stress is that even though these are stinging insects, and they can defend their nests very well, when they're in a swarm like this, they're not at all defensive, they don't have anything to defend, and they're not dangerous. If a swarm settles in your backyard or somewhere near where you're working, you can just let it be. It's not a danger to anybody, and it will move on in a day or two, as we will see once they finish choosing their home. So they haven't yet located their new home site, and so they face the problem of where are they going to live. And this is a problem that is solved by a select group of the bees in the swarm. They have a search committee of several hundred bees. We'll call these scout bees. It's only 3 to 5% of the swarm, so they're very special bees. And they are among the oldest bees in the swarm, and these are the bees that have had the most experience flying out from their hive and finding their way back because they had been foraging before this. That's a skill that they're going to use now because they will be flying from this swarm cluster, flying out all around the countryside nearby, actually out for distances of up to 4 or 5 miles, exploring the forests for tree cavities. And they will then find some of these cavities, and then they will choose among them to decide which one will be their new home. So the process of finding a home starts with the scouts flying off the swarm cluster, fanning out, because each scout searches on her own at first, and searching for potential homes. What does a scout bee do once she's gone out into the woods, and you can see scout bees in the woods? You'll see them going up and down trees, looking for dark knotholes or cracks in trees. When a bee finds one and she discovers that there's a cavity inside a knothole, say, she will spend about 30 minutes inspecting that tree cavity to see if it's really good as a bee home. She will measure things like the volume of the cavity and the entrance size and the entrance height and all the other things that we just looked at. And the way she does that is she makes a number of visits inside the cavity during this 30-minute period. Each visit inside, she walks around on the walls and the floor and the ceiling of the cavity. This is a diagram based on the behavior of one scout bee that was inspecting a cubicle nest box that I had set up for an experiment. And the bee, when a scout bee makes her inspection, she does it in a series of visits, each one about a minute long. And this bee made 25 visits during her half-hour inspection. Her first visit, you can see she came in the entrance here, walked around a little bit, and then came back to the entrance. The next visit, she did much the same, but she went a little deeper inside the cavity. Next visit, she went, by the 17th visit, I should say, she's gone quite deep, walked all around inside the cavity, and by the last visit, which was visit 25, she was walking freely all around the cavity. And in ways that remain a bit mysterious to us, she's able to gain from these experiences inside a sense of the volume of the cavity and the entrance size and so forth. So she's inspected the cavity, and based on that inspection, she's developed a sense of the overall goodness of that site as a home site. And when I say overall goodness, she can do that by reference to an internal standard of goodness. These bees have actually never checked out home sites before. A worker bee only lives a few weeks. So these bees have never been scout bees before, but they are endowed genetically with a knowledge of what provides a good home. And so they inspect their site. They have a sense of this is an excellent site or a medium quality site or actually a pretty lousy site. And whatever it is, they will now come back to the swarm cluster and make a report, a public report at the swarm of what she has found. And in her report, and she'll make this report with a behavior which we call the waggle dance. This is a behavior where the bee walks across a vertical surface. In the case of a swarm, it would be the side of the swarm. What I've got depicted here is a bee walking across a honeycomb, but it's the same behavior. She walks across at a certain angle relative to straight up, in this case 40 degrees to the right of straight up. She walks forward at that angle, waggling her abdomen back and forth. She does that for a certain period of time. Then she stops, and then she circles around, and then she repeats that waggle run, and she'll come back around the other way. She'll do that over and over again. And in doing that, in ways I'll explain momentarily, she communicates the direction and the distance and the quality of the site that she found. Now, I've described the behavior, but even better, I want to now show you the behavior. And now we can try a video clip. So, Peter, do I drag this over? I drag this over. Okay, and I'll try playing this. Do this by that. Okay, I don't know if people can see this or not, but here we've got a scout bee on the surface of a swarm doing a waggle dance. There she's waggling, she stops, comes around, waggles, stops, comes around. You notice she's consistently pointing about 90 degrees to the left of vertical. That's indicating the direction. Each waggle run lasts about 2 seconds. The thing I want to draw your attention to is she's doing her dance right on the back of her swarm mates. And most of the bees in the swarm are quiescent. It's only the scout bees that are active while they're bivouacked like this. So let's play this again. So it's going to be the bees that you see moving around, either dancing or following the dancers, those are the scout bees. But as you can see, most of the bees are standing almost perfectly still. Hope people can see that. You can see the bees, the other scouts are following the dancer closely to get the information from her. Now, let's see. I don't want to go into great detail of how this communication system works, but I'll try to explain it briefly. The direction to the site that she's indicating is indicated by that angle of the waggle run. And here's an example of a bee that's using the waggle dance to indicate the location of a patch of flowers. So the bees are living in this tree, the flowers are over here. To indicate the direction, the bees note they first notice the compass bearing of the sun, and then they note the compass bearing of the flowers. And so in this case, the flowers are 40 degrees to the right of the direction of the sun. That means when the bee does her dance on the vertical surface, she orients her waggle runs 40 degrees to the right of straight up. So it's the angle relative to straight up that indicates the direction to the flowers relative to the direction of the sun. And then the distance is indicated by the duration of each waggle run. So you can see here, the greater the distance to the food source or the nest site, the longer the duration of each waggle run. So the bee we were watching was dancing about 2 seconds. Each waggle run lasted about 2 seconds. So she was indicating a nest site that was about 2,000 meters away. And that would be about 1¼ miles away. Pretty neat. Now, here's the amazing thing. I mean, to me, the amazing thing is that it works. Because let's step back into the natural world of a scout bee advertising a nest site. Let's say our swarm is hanging from a tree branch on the edge of the woods here. And let's say a scout bee has found maybe a ½ mile, maybe it's a mile away on another hillside, a tree cavity that looks pretty promising as a home site. She checks it out. She'll fly back, come back, she'll do a dance here, and now bees that follow her dance will be sufficiently well equipped with information to know to fly up to the top of the trees, fly over the tops of the trees, out to the right location, and then find that tree, then find that knothole. Find not just that tree, but actually that knothole that she had just visited. Part of the way that they're able to do that is the scout bee not only performs a dance back at the swarm to indicate the general area of the tree, of the potential home site, but she also marks it with a chemical. And we'll come back to that later on. So the recruits get to the right general area, and then they can pinpoint the site by orienting to the pheromone that the bee leaves behind. But still, to me, it's amazing. But I've seen it work, and it really does work. Clearly, it does work. So, pretty cool. Let's see. What's next? Oh, yeah, this brings us to the question of how exactly, then, do the scout bees conduct their decision-making? One thing I haven't stressed here is we've got several hundred scout bees that have gone out, fanned out across the forest, looking for home sites. A dozen or 2 dozen of these scout bees will discover will discover sites that are worth considering. Not all of them, but a couple dozen of the bees will. And each of these bees makes her own inspection, comes back, makes a report, and then, so we now have the bees face the problem of deciding which of the sites is going to be their new home. And the way I've investigated this is I can set up a swarm of bees in which every worker bee is labeled for individual identification. You can see these little colored and numbered tags like license plates that I've glued to the back of bees. And I can set the swarm up on a special swarm stand, and then I can video record all of the dances that the scout bees do. Fortunately, all of the scout bees, when they do their dances, it's always on the surface of the swarm, so it's easy to see their dances. And so from those video records, I can then have a complete record of every communication that the scout bees did. I know when a dance was done, the location of the site that was being advertised by the bee when she did her dance, and the time of day. And one thing I should stress at this point is I'm only going to be following the worker bees, because the queen bee plays no role whatsoever in this whole process. In fact, when I do these experiments, I put the queen inside a little, what we call a queen cage, and that's how I get the bees to cluster just where I want them to. But she can actually be isolated from the workers, and the whole process works perfectly. So a queen is a very special honeybee in a colony, but she's special because she's the mother of everybody. She's not a ruler. She's not well informed even. So when you do that, when you watch all of the dances on a swarm, and thus you're really eavesdropping on the debate or discussion that the scout bees are holding, you get a pattern of information shown here. And this is a complicated slide, so let's go through it carefully. What this is a record of a debate that unfolded over 16 hours on one swarm of bees. The scout bees in this swarm discovered 11 different possible home sites, candidate nest sites, and there were 149 scout bees that were involved in this debate. 149 different scout bees performed dances to contribute to the decision-making process. Let's go through each one of this. Let's go through the figure. You can see there are 8 panels here. Here's the first panel. This represents the time period from 11 o'clock in the morning to 1 o'clock in the afternoon on the 20th of July, the first day. Within each panel, we have a record of the dance activity, of the dancing that was done on the swarm. Each of these arrows codes the amount of dancing, codes dances for a given nest site. So this pink arrow pointing to the right here indicates that there was bees performed dances for a candidate nest site to the east, and that was about 2 kilometers away. The length of the arrow indicates the distance, the direction of the arrow indicates the compass direction, and the width of the arrow indicates how many different scout bees during the 2-hour time period performed a dance to advertise that site. So this pink arrow was indicating that 8 different scout bees advertised that site. And each of these, and so for this first 2-hour time period, there were 6 different sites that were reported, site A, B, C, D, E, and F. So 6 different sites. Each site was discovered by 1 bee. Each site was good enough to be advertised with a waggle dance, and what happens is 1 scout bee discovers a site, she does a dance for it. Scouts that didn't find a site will follow the dance. They will go out to the site. Each of those scouts that are recruited to the site will inspect the site for themselves, and if they agree that it's a good site, they themselves will come back and dance for it. And that's how we could go with this site A. That's how we got 8 different bees during the first 2-hour performing dances for it. So they started out with 6 different possible sites. The next 2-hour time period, again, they've got a variety of sites that are being advertised by the dancing scout bees. The surface of the swarm can get pretty riotous with these dancers, in fact. 3rd 2-hour time period, this is 3 to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, still a variety of sites are being advertised by the dancing bees. By the end of the afternoon, from 5 to 7 p.m., however, we can see that even though there's still a variety of sites being advertised, 2 of the sites are getting most of the action. The site to the south, represented by the blue arrow, and the site to the southwest, indicated by this gold-colored arrow. And that's where the process ended on the first day. So they had gotten a variety of possibilities on the table, but they certainly hadn't come to an agreement. The next morning, things started up where they left off. Site to the south and the site to the southwest were getting most of the attention, most of the advertising, and that pattern persisted all morning. The site to the southwest started to dominate the discussion, but then it started raining at the end of the morning, and the the whole process shut off, but the next morning, every scout bee that danced for the site to the southwest. And at the end of the morning, it was a good weather morning, by the way, the swarm lifted off and flew away to the southwest, moving to that site. That was their chosen home site. So I think you can see in this eavesdropping on the scout bees debate, you can see they do a remarkable thing. They explore their options, they get their options on the table in the sense of getting them advertised on the swarm surface, and then they winnow out the poorer options and end up with the one option, and it turns out that option is the best one. So they come to an agreement on the best site. Now, you might wonder how it is that I know that that agreement is for the best site. And I know it because I've actually tested swarms on their ability to make these decisions. Do they come to an agreement on the best site? And the way I do this is I go to an island off the coast of Maine, Appledore Island. It's about 6 miles out in the Atlantic. It's one of a set of islands among the Isles of Shoals. And it's isolated, well isolated from the mainland. And I'll show you a picture of this island. The island has a number of characteristics. It's very windy. It has lots of poison ivy, many hundreds of breeding gulls on it. But the main feature of it is that it has no large trees on the island. And so it has no natural nest sites for the bees. In effect, by going to this island, I corner the real estate market, at least with respect to bees. And I can take out to the island a swarm of bees. I can set it up on the porch of one of the buildings at the Shoals Marine Laboratory in the center of the island. And then I can put out on one side of the island 5 possible home sites for the bees. These are nest boxes. And I'm going to make one of them nest boxes is going to be an excellent home for the bees. It'll be nice and roomy. And the other 4 are going to be acceptable, but they're not as roomy. Instead of being 40 liters, they're only 15 liters. Which the bees will accept, but it's not as good at those. It does not make as good a site. And the question is, in this array, how well can swarms choose the one best nest site? So it is a multiple choice test. I won't go through I don't want to bog down in the details, but these are the results of what we see in these choice tests. So for example, trial 1 represents the decision making by the first swarm that I tested. And what's plotted here is across the time of day from 8 o'clock in the morning till about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. The black bars indicate how many scout bees were counted outside of each nest box, buzzing around outside of each nest box. And so the excellent nest box was way over here on the right in the array, and it wasn't discovered until the afternoon. All of the mediocre ones were discovered early in the day. Nevertheless, even though the poorer sites were discovered earlier, it was actually the excellent site where the scout bees built up interest, and it was the excellent site that was chosen. So at first trial, the bees made the correct choice. The next trial, different swarm, same nest boxes, but everything shuffled around. They again chose the excellent box. And we've done this experiment many times, 10 times in fact, and 9 times out of 10 they have made the correct decision. And that's what makes me be able to say that yes, they choose the best site. Well, so we we've seen a little bit about how they do. There's dancing involved. We know they make good choices, but we haven't really looked at how the actual individual bees behave to produce this collective choice of the site. And one way I like to explain it is to point out that we really have to answer 2 questions. One question is somehow the bees, the interest of the scout bees, grew and grew for the best site. For example, the best site was this one to the southwest, but it started out being a very minor player in the discussion. Only attracted 13% of the dancing bees. Then it grew to 33% of the dancing bees, then 62% of the dancing bees, and finally 100%. So somehow the interest for the best site grew and grew, And at the same time, the bees' interest faded for all the poorer sites. Even this site there was a pretty good site apparently. It got a lot of interest, this site to the south. Even by the end, even that site faded from popularity among the scout bees. So what was going on there? Well, good way to think of it is to think of this decision process like a democratic election, in the sense that just like in our own elections, which we've been watching with the presidential primaries, you've got different candidates. In the case of bees, they're not people, they're nest potential home sites, site A, site B, for example. You've got supporters for each candidate site, scouts committed to site A and scouts committed to site B. And you have a pool of uncommitted voters or uncommitted scout bees. And just like in our own elections, individual scout bees tend to be committed to one site or the other. And why is that? It's because these sites, it will be very hard for a scout bee to know about more than one site. After all, one site might be 2 miles to the north, and another site might be a mile to the southeast. These are trees that are very far apart. It's hard enough for a scout bee to find one tree, so they can't just skip from one tree and go visit another tree. Instead, each scout bee knows about just one site. Now, let's say site A is the better site, the better of the two sites. How is it going to win in this popularity contest? How is it going to attract the most supporters? Well, it's going to win in this contest, in this democratic process, if its supporters produce the most convincing, the most persuasive advertisements. And so they will be able to attract the most uncommitted scout bees. Now, what does that mean? That means they will win in this competition if their dances are the most persuasive. And how does a bee make a waggle dance persuasive? She does it over and over and over again. And conversely, the site that's poorer is going to lose if the scout bees supporting it are honest and don't advertise their site as strongly, because it's not as good a site. And this, as we'll see, is a key to the whole process, because with the bees, perhaps unlike our own elections, a key feature of honeybee elections is honest advertising of the candidates. A bee will only strongly advertise a candidate site if it is a really good site. Now, how do I know that? How can I make that claim? I can make that claim because one summer I went back to Appledore Island, and now I did a somewhat simpler experiment. I again set up a swarm on the island, but now I put out just 2 nest boxes. One is excellent, and one was acceptable, the 40-liter and the 15-liter. And now you can see I had a situation where I had scout bees coming back from both sites to one swarm, and they were dancing side by side at the same time, except that some of the bees were reporting on a good site and some were reporting on a ho-hum site. And what I did is I carefully counted how many dance circuits each scout bee performed. A dance circuit consists of the waggle run portion of the dance followed by the return run. That would be one circuit. And if a bee did another waggle run and another return run, that would be a second circuit. And when I did this, I found a very strong difference in the pattern of dancing between the bees that had visited the dream home site and the bees that had visited what I like to call the fixer-upper, the 15-liter site. The bees that came back and were reported on the dream home, the 40-liter site, they did dances that varied in duration. Some bees did very short dances, some bees did dances with several hundred dance circuits in them, but on average, they did a dance with 90 dance circuits, and that takes about 180 seconds, or about 3 minutes, to perform a dance with 90 dance circuits. And during 3 minutes, a lot of uncommitted scouts can follow a dance and learn about that site. In contrast, the bees coming back from the fixer-upper site only did, on average, dances that lasted for 30 dance circuits, and that only lasts 60 seconds. So every time a bee came back from the fixer-upper, she only danced 1 minute, whereas the bees that came back from the dream home, each of them danced on average 3 minutes. So you can see 3 minutes is a lot longer than 1 minute. They're going to be much more powerful, the dream home dancers, in attracting recruits. And as I mentioned earlier, a bee is able to judge even though she's gone just to one site, she can judge whether site's the dream home or the fixer-upper by reference to her internal standard of what's good and what's not good. Well, how does this all add up? How does it all work together? Well, I like to explain it with this schematic diagram here. Imagine you have two sites. One's poor, one's better. The better one's better because it has a smaller entrance. And let's say both sites are discovered at exactly the same time, each by one scout bee. That would be the typical situation. Each site is discovered by one bee. They're discovered at the same time. Both scout bees come back to the swarm at exactly the same time. But the blue bee, who is dancing for the better site, she dances for 3 minutes to advertise her site. The red bee dances only 1 minute to advertise her site. So the blue bee is going to will recruit more bees to her site than will the red bee. So if you came back 3 hours later, you might see for every 2 red bees you would see dancing, now you're going to see 3 blue bees, because the dancing by the first bee was 3 times, by the first blue bee was 3 times stronger than the first red bee. And then if you came back another 3 hours later, the thing is going to be even more dominated by the blue bees, because when you think about it, at 1 o'clock, there were 3 times as many blue bees as red bees, and still each blue bee was dancing 3 times more than each red bee. So the thing snowballs, or it's kind of positive feedback in favor of the blue bee site, which is the site over here on the right. And so the best candidate achieves the greatest popularity in this contest among the scout bees through this honest campaigning. That honesty is very important. So let's go back. So that's how they make the decision. So at this point, this schematic swarm, for example, would have decided, okay, we're going to go to this site over here. But that's just making the decision. And as we all know, it's one thing to make a decision, and then it's another thing to implement a decision. And that's really the case for the bees as well. How do they implement their decision? And that's a big challenge for the bees, because of that feature that up to this point, only about 3% of the bees have been active, the scout bees. Most of the bees have just been hanging out at the swarm. And for a bee to for those 97% of the bees that have just been hanging there quietly, conserving their energy, one of the things they need to do is they need to warm up their flight muscles. Bees are, in order for a bee to fly, she has to warm up the muscles in her thorax that enable her to, that move her wings. Those muscles in her thorax that move the wings, we call them the flight muscles, they have to actually be warmed up to our body temperature for them to contract fast enough, for the wings to beat fast enough, for the bees to generate enough lift to fly. So all of the bees that were been hanging quietly in that cluster for a few days, they have to be told that it's time to warm up their flight muscles. Furthermore, once they have warmed up their flight muscles and they've launched into flight, most of these bees have no idea where the chosen site is located. They need guidance on how to fly there. So these are 2 big problems. And our little scout bees, who are the heroes of this story, they solve both problems. How do they do that? Well, the warm-up is triggered by scout bees from the winning site coming back from the winning site to the swarm cluster, walking around on the surface of the cluster, grabbing the quiet bees and pressing against those bees and making a special signal called piping. I'll show you a video of how this works in a moment, but here it is. This is a bee that's a scout bee. She's come back. I put these little motions here because she makes this piping sound by vibrating her wings. She activates those muscles in her thorax that move the wings, and she can make a high-pitched sound. Each little pipe sound lasts, these are sonograms of these, where we've got the time on the horizontal axis and the frequency of the sounds on the vertical axis. Each of these little piping sounds lasts about a second or so, and each one sounds, sounds like zzz, zzz. Let me show. And so these bees walk around, the scout bees from the winning site come back, walk around, and every time they feel a cool bee beneath them, they will grab that bee, press their thorax against that bee, and make this piping sound, and it's telling the bee warm up. I want to try now playing a video of this, and what you're going to see is you're going to see bees walking around on this. It's a little cage, and inside this cage is a queen bee. What I'm videoed is actually the cage that's holding the bee of a swarm, but the swarm is taken off to fly to its new home. The queen couldn't go with them because she's stuck in this cage, and what you're going to be seeing is a bunch of scout bees running around on this cage trying to tell the queen, come on, get warm, we're ready to go, we need to go. So let's play I'll drag the video over and see if we can make this one work for us. Let's see. I hope people can hear it. Play it again. I just want to stress it's that sound. Didn't that little scout bee look persistent and insistent as well? Oh, oh! Yes, okay, good. Folks could hear that. If you can't hear it, as I mentioned earlier, Carl Flato's has this beautiful series of videos that show this behavior as well as others. And we'll have the website posted for that later on. So, bees get warmed up. Oh, and let me show you a slide. Let's see. This actually shows visually the increase in the temperature of the bees in the swarm cluster. These are photos taken through with an infrared camera. The temperature scale, to read these things, you can, there's a temperature scale over here. It's in degrees centigrade. Our body temperature is about 37 degrees centigrade. So this kind of light gray here means body temperature. This is a picture of the surface of a swarm 15 minutes before takeoff. And you can see most of the bees are gray. They're cool. There's a couple of hot bees with hot thoraces here and here. These are scout bees. But here's the same swarm, same surface, 1 minute before takeoff. And you can see almost every bee has a thorax that now looks bright white, which means it's way up here at 41 degrees. It's hotter than our body temperature, than our core body temperature. These bees are hot and are ready to take off. And 1 minute after they got to this temperature, they do launch into flight. So now the scouts have gotten everybody to warm up and launch into flight. Now, what happens? Well, at this point, the bees are milling around in the air. They're forming a cloud. It's about 30 feet long. It's about 20 feet wide, and it's about 10 feet high. And the density of bees is about 2 bees per cubic foot. It looks like this. And I put a little person in here to give you a sense of scale. These bees are now swirling in the air up there, just a little bit above head height. And they're pretty conspicuous. If you ever see a flying swarm, you will notice it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the problem is that most of the bees in this swarm cloud, 97% of them, have no clue where they should be flying to. They stay together as a cloud, and our little scout bees, again, solve the problem. And here, let's just stress the complication. You've got your swarm here. It's going to take off here. Bees are swirling around in a cloud here. And somehow that cloud of flying bees has to be guided up to the top of the trees, across the top of the forest, all the way over to this one tree over here. How on earth are they going to do that? Well, the way they do it, worked this out a few years ago, is that the scout bees point the way by performing streaker flights through the top of the swarm. And that's what these arrows here are representing. These are the flight paths of the scout bees. The scout bee, who's one of the informed bees, will streak through the top of the swarm cloud, flying straight in the direction of the new home. and the bees, the unformed bees are below, and they can look up and they can see these streaking bees against the bright sky. They're very conspicuous. And once a streaker gets to the front of the cloud, she slows down, drops down low, and comes back, and then she can shoot through again and come around again. And there's a few hundred of these informed scout bees, so collectively they can actually make a pretty strong indication of which direction to go. And the swarm cloud, once it gets up to speed, can motor along at about 6 miles per hour. Well, that's good. That gets them to the right, that gets them going in the right direction. Question is there bee loss during swarming? Are there lost non-scout bees? Not very many. They're very good about sticking together as a group. The final stage of the move is pinpointing to all of these uninformed bees the knothole or crack that is their final destination, is, in a sense, the front door of their new home. And the way this works is that scout bees, somehow, and this is a real mystery, somehow the scout bees are able to put the brakes on this flying cloud of bees so that the cloud stops near the destination tree. And then the scouts drop out of the cloud, they land at the front door of the new home and release a pheromone. It smells like lemons. It's from a special gland, and it's an attractive or assembly pheromone. The bees land, they expose the membrane that has the pheromone on it, and then they beat their wings. They fan their wings to disperse the aroma, and that marks that site, and it draws the other bees to their new home. And within 10 or 15 minutes, once all the bees will be moved into their new home. It's quite a complete and clean move, quite a clean process. So to summarize, what we've seen then is the following different parts of this whole process of choosing a forest home. We saw that it started with scout bees fanning out across the forest, searching the forest, and finding various possible home sites, 10 or more. We saw that it involves the scout bees that have found home sites, potential sites, to come back to the swarm cluster, report on their finds by performing waggle dances. We've seen then that the bees then conduct a kind of popularity contest, a friendly competition among the scout bees representing different sites to see which site will gain the strong popularity first. And the best site, thanks to the honest advertising with the dances, the best site almost always wins in this competition. Once they've made that decision, then they implement the decision by the scout bees coming back and producing piping signals on the swarm cluster to arouse, to stimulate the non-scouts to warm up their flight muscles. And once the swarm has launched into flight, we've seen that the scout bees steer the airborne swarm with streaker flights which point the way to the new home. And once the cloud of airborne bees reaches the tree that is their new home, they mark the entrance with an assembly pheromone. So it's an amazing process. One of the things I have to remind myself in talking about this is that this is all done by creatures with brains the size of a grass seed. And I think I still find it amazing. Just the ability to do these waggle dance communication is breathtaking. But then you add onto the scout bee's ability to things like making the piping signals and the streaking flights and a measurement of the nest cavities. To my mind, it is remarkable. And sometimes I even wonder, gosh, if you can do all that with a brain the size of a grass seed, how come we have such big brains? What are we doing with all of the brains up in our skulls? Good question, eh? But I guess for those of you that are foresters, I think one of the things, or interested in trees in general, I think probably the most that it's a tree that has just the right properties to be a good home for the bees. And we can also see that it has to pass muster, it has to be approved, it has to be danced for by operation. You might want to let that tree go. Be a good thing to do. Last thing is, if you're interested, wanting to get more information about this, I have written a book on this topic. I've only been able to talk about sort of the highlights of the process tonight. The story is a very rich one. The magazine called Northern Woodlands. If you can find the summer 2011 issue of that, there's a summary article that summarizes the contents of the book in that. That can be found at libraries. And I think if you go to the Northern Woodlands website, you can order a back copy of that magazine. So I hope you've enjoyed this story about the bees. And I think at this point, Peter, maybe we should open things up to questions. Does that sound good?
Yes, very good, Tom. Thank you. This was once again an outstanding presentation. Let me expand the chat pod so that people can see.
Yeah.
And what happened?
Start at the bottom and work up, maybe. If the clear coat is done.
Yep, there you go.
If the clear coat is done and a bee tree is left that has been used by bees before, will the bees hang with that, even though the clear cut now surrounds the tree? I suspect they would, Bob, in the sense that I have seen bees occupying trees in the middle of pastures. So I think, in fact, it may actually be good for the bees to have a site out in the open where they get a lot of good sunlight. It helps them in the winter when they need to go out on sunny days to do so-called cleansing flights. And so, yeah, I think that will be fine for the bees. Sometimes the swarm selects a site not too optimal inside the wall of a home. What happens there? Yeah, the bees are always like us. They can only choose among the options that they locate. So sometimes they don't always find a great site. Usually they do, because they've got hundreds of bees out looking there, and even a wall in a house can be a good thing. It can have the right size entrance, and so forth. So, but I have seen some times when they watched one swarm which no bee ever found a very exciting site. So sometimes that does happen. I've caught quite a few swarms, put them in a cardboard box, take them home, etc. They go right in with no decision making. Why does this work? That's a great question. It works, Barry, because you've truncated the whole process. You've solved the problem for them, and so you've sort of like stepped in and sped the whole decision-making process up for them. Once they, so yes, if you've got bees and they're dumped into a hive, they somehow they have the flexibility to just drop the whole search process and move right into the nice home that you provided them. Is temperature a relevant consideration for site selection? Is it not just the size of the hive? I don't know. I think most, at least in nature, inside the trees, the temperatures are pretty well buffered because the walls are so thick. And I do know that size is critical. They absolutely must avoid cavities that are too small. If they move into too small of a cavity, they will die in the winter. So I think that is probably that is, to the best of my knowledge, the most important variable. See, ants have a similar communications methods as bees. Yes, in fact, some ants go through a similar decision-making process, but in the sense it's a competition, a popularity contest, but the ants don't have waggle dances to recruit ants to one site or the other. They use chemical trails. So, but the logic is really the same. Question, do bees prefer certain species of trees for their site? I'd say the answer to that is a definitive no, wrote Suzanne. And I say that because I have probably located 40 bee trees in my life, usually by beelining, tracking bees back to their homes. And there are all sorts of trees. There is no one species of the Northeast species that we have that stands out as being predominant and thus suggestive of being a preferred type of tree. Seen them in almost virtually every species we've got up here. The only one I don't think I've seen them in is cucumber tree, Magnolia acuminata, but oaks, pines, ashes, hickories, maples, you name it, they're in there. Let's see. Does opening orientation play a part in the site selection? Yes. South and southwest are the most popular among the bees, and I think that's because those are the sites that can give them the strongest sun. And having strong sun on the nest entrance helps the bees start their foraging early in the morning, and it also helps them in the winter when they have to go out and do cleansing flights on a sunny day. It gives them a warm perch from which to start. What signals, besides creation of queen cells, signal the onset of a swarm? That's a great question. There's one part of the whole decision-making process that we don't understand, and I haven't talked about, and that is, how does a colony decide when it's going to swarm? And the first step in that is making queen cells. So we don't know how that decision is made, and so your question addresses a black box to us, something we just don't know much about. Why don't the scouts go out and find a cavity before they swarm from the current hive? Wouldn't it be safer weather-wise? You're right, Rob. That would be safer, and we actually now have some evidence that scout bees do start a day or two before the swarm leaves the parental hive. I've never seen them make a decision before they, without clustering. But I have seen we did some work on Appledore Island where we set up hives and set up nest boxes, and we watched whether scout bees came out of those hives, and the hives were preparing to swarm, and we watched whether those colonies had scout bees active, checking out our nest boxes on the island even before the swarm had come out of the hives. And in some cases they did, so sometimes they do start the scouting earlier on. Sort of like getting your options lined up. What determines where the swarm gathers after leaving the hive? That's another unanswered question. We know what the process is. What you see is the bees swarm out of the hive. They land here and there, different places. Often they're somewhat sheltered, and workers start releasing the assembly pheromone, and wherever the queen sits, wherever the queen who comes out partway through the exodus, wherever she alights, whichever group she joins, then everybody joins where she does. So in a sense, the queen, chooses the site. How do the scouts make sure the queen is in the departing swarm? Great. I'm really glad you asked that question. That was another thing we tested. They pay attention. They know that the queen is with them because if they smell her, queen is always producing a very special odor called queen substance, and if the queen is not present and they don't smell that odor, they will go back into their hive. Likewise, when the swarm takes off from its bivouac and moves to its new home, sometimes they start their flight, they start moving away, start flying away, they'll get going along, and the queen needs to take a rest. So she drops to the ground or drops to the tree. They quickly sense that she's missing from this flying. This is a nasty experiment. You can actually set up a swarm, have it take off, keep the queen in the cage, but put a little queen substance on one of the worker bees, and they will fly off as if they had their queen. So poor swarm, but it does demonstrate that it's just the queen. There's nothing else about the queen other than having her the right smell. Is it a good idea to put out a few swarm boxes, also known as bait hives, next to my existing hives? But I like to put them at least 100 meters away. If I do that, I will then can capture swarms from that come out of my bee yard, but not real close. What's the scientific name of the species of honeybees subject of? Yes. The scientific name is Apis mellifera. Apis mellifera. Where is it native to? It is not native to North America. It is native to Europe, Western Asia, and Africa. It was introduced by Europeans to North America and the rest of the Americas and Australia. It's been carried around the world by its human admirers. The purchase queens often have clipped wings. What impact on swarming? Will the hive raise a new queen to swarm? What happens if a colony swarms, casts a swarm, and the queen has her wings clipped? The queen will go out of the hive with the workers, but because she can't fly, she'll fall from the entrance of the hive to the ground, and the swarm is confounded at that point. They will cluster around her, and I think they will start the house hunting process. They may even go through the whole house hunting process, but they will always be foiled when it comes time to move to their new home. So that clipping, I don't recommend having your queens clipped, or because it does harm the biology of the bees. So when the queen stops to rest, as you described, is it she, the queen, who reinitiates the flight to the new site? No, apparently not. It looks like what happens, what we see is that they will pause there for a few hours, and then the scout bees, in some way, they work out the timing. They again go back, pipe everybody, get everybody warmed up, trigger them to take off in flight, and then they move on continue their journey. Does the queen bee kill the drone after it mates? No, the drone dies automatically. When the queen bees and drones, or male bees, they mate in flight. The queen is a young queen. Queen bees mate just during the first week of their life. They mate with about a dozen males. They acquire enough sperm from those dozen or so males to last them for the rest of their life. They can store the sperm in a special organ. But when they do mate with each drone, the drone, his genitalia break off and he falls away and he dies. So it's a terminal event for a drone bee. A very successful but terminal event. I heard the term royal jelly. Is it relevant to honeybees? Royal jelly is sort of a common name given to the food that is produced by worker bees, and when fed in high amounts to a larva of a female bee, will stimulate that bee to develop into a queen rather than a worker. So queens are fed on a royal diet, and workers are fed on a much simpler and less rich diet. I have Italian, Russian, and buckfast bees. Yes, those are different subspecies of Apis mellifera. Yeah. Italian is a bee that's native to the Italian peninsula. The Russian is native to the Caucasus Mountains, and there are other races that are native to Ireland or to Spain and so forth. Which strain is effective at cleaning off varroa mites? We don't really have, that's a good question. We don't have a good answer. There are a number of lines of bees one called Minnesota varroa sensitive hygienic, or Minnesota hygienic. These are ones that have been bred through human selection to be good at not cleaning off the varroa mites off the adults, but killing the cells in which they're infected with varroa mites. We're trying to raise local queens here in the Northeast rather than obtaining from the South. I think that's a good idea. And I do the same sort of thing. Only I don't take the trouble to breed the bees. I just capture wild swarms, because I know most of those are coming from colonies living in trees where nobody's taking care of them, and they weren't very tough bees that are able to survive our winters, they would never have produced a swarm. So that's another way. That's another approach to get bees that are well adapted to our climate. Well, thank you for the positive remarks. That's very encouraging. It's been my pleasure to do this, and I'll answer. I don't know what your time frame is, Peter, but I'll answer one more question.
Well, yeah. We have one last question. William Brainerd's looking at or commenting on the movement of honeybees on trucks and moving them around from farm to farm. Are there concerns with that? I mean, I guess I see hives show up here and there, so they get moved somehow.
There are concerns about that. And it's concerns for the health of the bees. It's not healthy for the bees to be moved and trucked like that. It's really done for the purposes of large-scale agriculture. And it means when a beekeeper does that, they actually have to take extra good care of the bees. They often have to make sure that there's good food for them where they arrive, and sometimes there isn't. And that is a problem. It's one of the reasons we're having more and more trouble with the health of honeybees in the U.S.
Interesting. Well, Tom, thank you. This was, as everybody's pointed out, this is a great presentation, and I want to thank you, and I want to thank the audience. We had a very good hold on, as you will. I think you topped out at about 50 participants, and we still have in the mid-30s, so that's outstanding. So anyway, so we'll call this webinar to a close. My thanks to everyone, and as I've pointed out, you can check the cornellforestconnect.ning.com site in just a few minutes, and I will have posted the link to these to the recording for the noon hour as well as the 7 p.m. So thank you all very much, and thank you again, Tom. This was wonderful. I appreciate it very much.
It's great fun.
And I'm going to go out this weekend